A tough battle in the hospital. Reverend Jimmy Swaggart passed away at 90 years old.
Nobody expected the room to feel like that. Not on this day. Not after everything Jimmy Swaggart had lived through, fought through, and survived. People walked into that quiet sanctuary thinking it would be a simple goodbye, maybe a few hymns, a few memories, a few polite tears. But the moment Donnie Swaggart stepped forward, the atmosphere changed. It was like all the noise of the past decades, the scandals, the music, the ministry, the victories, the heartbreak, suddenly settled on his shoulders. And when he finally opened his mouth to speak, the whole room inhaled at once, because everyone could tell this wasn't going to be a soft, polished tribute. This was a son standing in front of the world, trying to honor a father whose story was anything but simple.
Hold on a minute, wait a minute. We're playing the guitars too timid. Are you understanding what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I want them hot.
Yes, sir. Careful what you wish for. All right.
I have confidence you can do it.
1, 2, 1.
What came out of Donnie that day wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't coded with scripture to hide the cracks. It was raw. It was heavy. And honestly, it was probably the most honest thing that's ever been said from that pulpit. People weren't just wiping tears. They were trying to breathe through the weight of it all. Because Donnie didn't stand there pretending his father never stumbled. He didn't act like the world hadn't watched every mistake. He looked right into the moment and told the truth in a way only a son could. But to understand why that speech shattered the room the way it did, we have to go back before the scandals, before the headlines, before the rebuilding and the fall and the rise again. Back to when Jimmy was simply a young man with a piano, a dream, and a fire in his voice that could make strangers cry. Because that history, all that complicated, messy, beautiful history, is the reason Donnie's words hit the soul the way they did.
Things like cars, suits, etc. probably mean more than they would when you get a little older. You realize it's not so much there anymore.
The people who followed Jimmy through the years remember how he was before everything got loud. The late-night revivals, the small country churches where the floorboards creaked under every step. The early days when his voice was stronger than his confidence and his songs were bigger than the places he played. Those close to him say he never planned on becoming a global name. He just wanted to sing. He wanted to preach. He wanted to reach the broken and the lonely and the ones who felt left out of God's family. And he did. For a long time, he did. But fame doesn't knock politely. It crashes through the door, rearranges the furniture, and dares you to stop it. And when the world started calling Jimmy the most powerful voice in televangelism, everything shifted. Money came in, opportunities came in, attention came in, and with all of that came temptation, weakness, and pressure no one was prepared for.
That it's not so much God extracting a price for genius, Gus. I think it's that genius itself extracts the price.
The scandals that followed weren't just headlines, they were earthquakes. They shook churches, they divided families, they shattered trust. And they changed the course of Jimmy's life forever. The man who once felt unstoppable suddenly felt exposed, and Donnie saw it all from the front row. He wasn't just the preacher's son, he was the one who read the angry letters, heard the whispers, and watched people disappear from the pews overnight. He saw the pride, he saw the pain, he saw the rebuilding. And he saw the quiet moments afterward, the moments people never hear about, when a man who used to preach with thunder in his voice would sit alone with a Bible open in front of him, trying to understand how things had gone so wrong. That's why this funeral wasn't a grand affair. No spotlights, no network cameras, no choir rehearsing in the background. Just a plain sanctuary, dim lights, and the closest circle of people who had loved him, hurt because of him, forgiven him, and prayed for him. A complicated gathering for a complicated man. Some expected crowds down the block, maybe pastors from around the country, but none of the big names came, not one. And whether it was politics or fear of reopening old wounds, it didn't matter much to the people.
Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. He said to tell them again, Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever.
People who were there, because they knew this moment wasn't about image, it was about truth. When Donnie finally stepped toward the pulpit, he looked smaller than he normally does. Not physically, emotionally. Like he had spent years preparing for this moment without even realizing it. His hands trembled slightly as he rested them on the wood. For a second, he didn't say a word, and that silence, somehow, it said everything. Then his voice cracked on the very first sentence. My father failed, but he never stopped pointing us to Jesus. The room shattered. People who hadn't cried in years broke down. Elderly men wiped their faces with shaking hands. Women held onto tissues they'd folded neatly before the service. Even people who thought they'd made peace with everything suddenly felt all the old memories rising again. Because Donnie didn't hide from the truth. He didn't dodge it, excuse it, or wrap it in soft language. He faced it head on. And that honesty, it was disarming. It stripped away the walls people had built around their feelings. It reminded everyone that before the scandals, before the fame, before the mistakes that went public, there was once a man who simply loved God and loved music. And after everything fell apart, that man still tried to find his way back, even if it was messy, imperfect, and misunderstood. Donnie talked about days when Jimmy would play the piano at home, hands slower than they used to be, voice thinner but still familiar. He talked about nights when Jimmy would call him unexpectedly just to talk about a scripture he couldn't get out of his mind. He talked about moments when his father apologized, not publicly, not on camera, but privately, where it actually mattered. Apologies no one will ever hear because they weren't spoken for the world. They were spoken for the people he loved. But here's the twist, the part no one saw coming. Donnie wasn't just talking about forgiveness. He was talking about weight. The kind of weight that sits on a person's soul when they've been through storms they never fully recovered from. He talked about how Jimmy's final months weren't peaceful like everyone assumed. According to Donnie, his father grew quieter, more reflective. He pulled away from crowds. He withdrew from the spotlight. And even though he was still physically present, something deep inside him felt tired, as if the years of carrying his past had finally caught up. What nobody expected was what Donnie revealed next. He said that in the weeks before Jimmy passed, he had one last private conversation with his father. Just the two of them, no cameras, no staff, no pressure. Jimmy was lying in bed, too weak to preach, too tired to pretend. His voice had faded to barely a whisper, but he grabbed Donnie's hand and held it firmly, like he needed him to hear this, really hear it. According to Donnie, Jimmy said, I spent my whole life telling people how to find grace. I wish I had let myself accept it sooner. The room went completely silent when Donnie shared that. Not a cough, not a shuffle, nothing. Just raw, stunned stillness. Because those words didn't sound like a preacher giving one last sermon. They sounded like a man facing the reality of his own humanity, his regret, his hope, his longing for peace. And then Donnie said something that broke the room all over again. He wasn't perfect, but he tried. And sometimes, trying is all a man has left. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't polished, it was real, and real is what people needed. After the speech, they played one of Jimmy's old recordings, an early version of I've Never Been This Homesick Before. Not the polished studio cut, not the later version with the choir, the raw one, the one where the piano wavers slightly and his voice cracks just enough to feel human. When that song filled the sanctuary, something happened that words don't fully explain. People weren't just crying, they were grieving the man they remembered, the man they misunderstood, the man they tried to forgive, the man they couldn't forget. It was like the music gave them permission to feel everything they had pushed aside for years. And through the melody, you could almost hear Jimmy saying his own goodbye. But the part that stayed with everyone The part people kept whispering about long after the service ended was what Donnie said at the very end. He looked out at the room, voice trembling, tears in his eyes, and said, "If you remember anything about my father, remember this: he never quit reaching for God, even on the days when God felt far away." That line landed like a prayer wrapped in sorrow. When the service finally ended, people didn't rush out. They stayed. Some sat quietly in their seats, others stood by the walls, staring at the floor. A few hugged each other, even though they barely knew one another. Nobody wanted to break the silence. It was one of those rare moments where you could feel the presence of everything unsaid. And maybe that's why Donnie's speech hit differently, because it wasn't about celebrating a flawless legacy. It wasn't about pretending everything was neat and tied up with a bow. It was about facing the real story: the highs, the lows, the cracks, the lessons, the faith, the failures, the music, and the man behind all of it. By the time Donnie stepped down from the pulpit, his face was red, his eyes swollen, but he looked lighter too, like he'd finally put down a burden he'd been carrying for decades. Like speaking the truth, his truth, had freed him in a way nothing else ever had. In the end, this funeral wasn't for the cameras or the press or the public. It was for the people who had lived the story with him, the ones who remembered the early revivals, the ones who stayed through the scandals, the ones who forgave, the ones who couldn't, the ones who prayed anyway, the ones who hoped for one last miracle. And maybe, just maybe, they got one. Because on that day, as Donnie stood trembling behind the pulpit, something powerful happened. A complicated legacy got a human ending. A broken story found closure. And a father and son, after everything, finally found peace in the truth. Now, I want to hear from you. Did you grow up listening to Jimmy's music? Did his ministry impact your life, whether in a good way or a painful one? How did you feel hearing Donnie's final words for his father? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, make sure you like the video, subscribe, and stay tuned. Because we're not done exploring the stories behind the headlines. There's always more beneath the surface. And sometimes, the truth is even more powerful than the rumors.